Okay, we're going to start with the Ottoman Empire first. They all come to an end. And they come to an end for multiple reasons. One, the sultans got lazy. Like sultans from like Aladdin, you know how Jasmine's dad was a sultan? They were so rich and so powerful, they got lazy and they gave their power away to their little lackeys to do the job. And after a while, if you've given away your job and you're too rich to care and you're being lazy and, wherever, those people are going to take advantage of you. And then along came corruption and nepotism where you hire your family or friends to do jobs or you give them the bid or whatever. And so eventually it becomes a huge mess and the things fall apart. So the Ottoman Empire with their big turbans are going to collapse. Because laziness and corruption. They were also not teaching the princes they didn't even bother to give them school before. So if you were a prince and you were going to become the leader at some point, you were taught how to do stuff. But they were too busy being lazy and gave stuff away that the next generation was too stupid to make any decisions. And they didn't care. And so the next generation could be lied to and manipulated by the people who are actually doing stuff and doing corruption. And that was a blow. Then England and the Netherlands are going to stick it to the Ottomans. England and the Netherlands over here. They used to have to travel through here and pay taxes when they were selling stuff to get to the Silk Road. So they decided if they go the long way around Africa, they don't have to pay them any money. And that screws them up. Because even though it is maybe a little bit more expensive, if you don't have to pay the Ottomans money, they have no more money to support the lazy princes and sultans, they're going to fall apart. There's also some food left that they didn't have enough food, and that's a huge problem too. And this side joined Hitler in World War I, and obviously they lost, so that didn't work out so well. So all of this is going to come crashing down. When the Ottomans, first of all, they changed their hats and they downsized a little bit. They joined the Hitlers in Germany and Japan, and they lose the war. And when you lose a war, the winner gets to decide what happens. And so you had two guys who decided to draw a map, and they drew it really, really bad. One was named Sykes, and the other's name was Picot. Sykes and Picot made country lines in the Middle East that angered the Arabs. By dividing up the Middle East in a hodgepodge way, which is this picture down here, they drew lines and didn't give a crap what the Arabs thought. So the lines that are still there have nothing to do with who's related to who likes who's related, or who has the same religion or same language or ethnic group. They are just imaginary lines that make no sense to these people. And English and the Netherlands handed out countries to other ones to take control of. You just had a major war over freedom, and now you're handing out countries to other people. So that's going to make people mad too. So obviously the British took a big share right here. French had this big share here. We even gave some to Russia. They were not on our side in World War II at the beginning, but we handed them land too. Italy had control. Italy was on Hitler's side, and we gave them land too. This is not going to go well because you can't own people. So they're still mad about this Sykes-Picot map, which is your picture today, because it has no relevance to the Middle Eastern Arabs at all. And just pay attention to what is orange here. This is how someone kind of described what Picot-Sykes, or the Sykes-Picot lines are stupid. A century after Sykes-Picot has exposed the emptiness underneath. Iraq was managed by Britain, and Syria was managed by France before both were granted independence. They flew new flags, built palaces for their leaders, encouraged commercial elites, and trained plenty of men in uniform. But they both had weak institutions, teeny civil societies, shady and unfair economies, and meaningless laws. Both countries were racked by coups and instability. A coup is when you go in and yank somebody out of their office and you take their job. And usually it's pretty violent. Syria went through 20 coups in 21 years. You didn't even know who was going to make it to the next year. It was like Survivor, who was going to be the leader of that office. And so they just kept going in and shuffling people until the Assads took power. Assad is a mustache guy who's currently the leader of Syria, and it's not going well. We'll talk about that Wednesday. And increasingly, the glue that held the countries together was just repressive rule and fear, just keeping people under control so they wouldn't do something like pull another coup. And so the conflict, we're going to go back to where it started. When Britain won the war, World War II, they realized that the Jewish people had created some instability among other people who didn't like them. That's why Hitler was trying to wipe them out. So Britain decided they're going to give some land to Jews. All the Jews in the world could come to this one piece of land. And so it's called Zionism. And basically, they created Israel just for the Jews. This is a national home for the Jews, and it's Israel. Really what they wanted wasn't, Europe felt bad about how the Jews were treated, but they really didn't still want them in their society. So if they create a whole country for them, and it's pretty much right here.
Is it okay countries or pretty crappy?
It's a really small spot, but it's where Moses, who started Judaism, is from, but it's also where Jesus was from in Christianity. So the fact that Jews got a home base and Christians and Muslims didn't, they all hate Israel now. And we are friends of Israel because we helped set that up. And so we look like the bad guy to the Middle East. And the very next day after Israel is made a country, the Muslim neighbors go in and invade them. That's how much they hated them. They couldn't even wait for the ink to dry, and they go taking over. So now, another place of conflict is us and Iran. Back in the day, we worked with Iran for oil because they had oil and we needed it. And we had business deals. But at some point, Iran wanted to own the oil and make their own decisions. And we didn't want that because we wanted cheap oil. So we yanked out one of their people and put one of our people in charge. That's a coup. We put the Shah in, and the Shah was a guy who dressed Western. He had a suit and tie, short hair. He didn't have a headdress on. He was okay with women voting and people being smart and going to school. He acted like an American. That made some people in Iran very angry who were very conservative. And so...
So did they not know we joined one of our people?
Do what?
Did they not know we put one of our people in?
Oh, they knew it. They didn't like it.
What the hell?
So we put
Didn't kill him?
in Shah in Iran. So our oil business dealings would be fair to us or favorable to us.
Why didn't they kill him?
Well, they were going to try. Then you have two groups of Muslims. You have the Sunnis and the Shiites. The Sunnis are kind of a little less strict. The Shiites are very strict. This bearded guy is one of the very strict ones. His name is Ayatollah Khomeini. He gets a bunch of people in Iran riled up about how terrible it is the U.S. has somebody in here, that they're not doing Islam right, and they should be in charge of, because they want religious leaders in charge. He's going to get everybody riled up and lead a revolution, and we have to get our guy out or they're going to kill him. So the Shah had cancer, and at the time the U.S. had the best hospitals. So the Shah comes over here for cancer treatment, but he was on vacation because we had to get him out of there. While he's gone, this bearded guy goes and takes his job over in his office and declares himself the new leader. And then he gets the people to follow him. They also took hostages from the U.S., because we had U.S. people working in Iran, in embassies and stuff, and they got captured and taken hostages in Iran for 444 days. Because the bearded guy wanted the U.S. out. He thinks that we are slutty, we have drugs, we have too many freedoms, we don't follow the Quran, we're just horrible, devilish society. And so our president at the time was trying to work out a deal to get him out. But we lost some helicopters and the military crashed and some of our people died trying to get him out. And it wasn't going very well. And so the movie Argo is about that attempt to try to sneak him out of there. Because 444 days, that's over a year. What was also going on was our president at the time, Carter, was running for re-election. Carter he's this small little guy, he's still alive. He was a peanut farmer. And now he builds Habitat for Humanity houses. He doesn't have a real authoritative tone, he's not real tough, and so he looked really weak when our people got snatched in Iran. Who was running against him was President Reagan, and he's going to actually win the election then. Reagan had been an actor, so he knew how to look on camera and dress and talk, and he looked better than the little peanut farmer guy. And like the day after Reagan was sworn in to be president, those people were released, so there's some suggestions that maybe he had a backdoor deal going on because he knew he was going to probably win. But the Iranian Revolution was to take back the country. And they took hostages. This bearded guy is going to die eventually, and there's going to be a replacement because there's always a replacement. And this group is always ready for someone to die. They have someone leading. And it was kind of just anti-US.
Ayatollah. The origin of Iran's current Islamic government and its antagonistic relationship with the West can be traced to the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
It brought to my attention that not all of you, but just a select few, are having a hard time remembering the rules about your cell phones. We are very grateful, we are very gracious to you all and allow you to use your cell phones at lunch. And if you want to continue doing that special privilege, then you need to follow the rules. And the rules are that those phones go at 8 o'clock, when that bell rings at 8 a.m., they should be in your locker by then or if not before. They get out of lunch, and then you will have them again out at the end of the day. So, but if we continue to have problems, you will not be allowed to use them at lunch. And I've heard that some people think, that won't happen. Well, you can ask kids who are at the high school now. We've done that before. We've banned cell phones for a week. They weren't happy, but we did. So if you want to continue using your cell phones at lunch, then you need to make sure that you are following the rules. Thank you.
Here's the short history. It's the 1970s. Iran's economy faltering, its self-proclaimed king, Mohammad Reza Shah, grows increasingly unpopular. Among Iran's intellectual class, he's seen as beholden to the US and Israel. A secular Muslim, his social reforms, including giving women the right to vote, put him at odds with Iran's religious leaders. They helped spread the writings and speeches of Ayatollah Khomeini, who the Shah had pushed into exile in the 1960s. From abroad, Ayatollah Khomeini fuels street protests, calling for the overthrow of the Shah. The Shah's supporters mount violent counter-protests. Iran is on the brink of civil war. Then, in early 1979, the Shah leaves Iran in what was officially described as a vacation, opening the way for the Ayatollah to return from exile to popular acclaim. 10 days later, the Shah's appointed prime minister goes into hiding, and Khomeini and his hardline Islamic supporters seize power. The Ayatollah declares Iran an Islamic republic and himself as supreme leader. As anti-Western sentiment builds, many of the country's Western-educated elite flee the country. Later that year, a group of Iranian protesters demand extradition of the Shah back to Iran so he can face trial and execution. At this time, he was in the U.S. for cancer treatment. These protesters stormed the U.S. Embassy, taking 66 people hostage. A failed hostage rescue attempt results in the deaths of 8 U.S. service members. The hostages are finally released 444 days later, just minutes after a new American president, Ronald Reagan, takes the oath of office, succeeding Jimmy Carter. Since then, the hardliners have ruled with an iron hand, creating today's ongoing conflict between reformers who would relax their country's strict Islamic social code and want better relations with the West, and the country's entrenched conservative establishment who find those ideas at odds with their revolutionary ideals. That's the short history of the Iranian Revolution.
Okay, then we're going to come to Lebanon, which is also a hot mess. Lebanon is right next to Israel, and it has a mix of people that don't get along. You have Sunnis, Shiites, and Christians, and you see that map here of they're all mixed together. What's also interesting is they all get to vote in the government, and so they all have these different groups. We usually just have Republicans and Democrats. They have all kinds of groups that now can't get along. We see what happens when two can't get along. They have a whole bunch. They had a civil war because they don't get along for 25 years. That means there are people who were born who didn't know anything about war except for 25 years and to kill each other off. What also didn't help is that Israel, with the Jews, invaded their country to take over the land. And people are already mad at Israel for having land in the first place, so this kind of hurt their cause a little bit more. And so when you have these foreign invaders coming into the country, they're already fractured, a terrorist group is going to start. And so Hezbollah is a terrorist group with a specific message. They are Shiites, so they're conservative. They want the Jews out.
Apologize for the interruption. Another announcement before, I don't want to forget this one. The high school wrestling practice is, I'm sorry, middle school wrestling practice is at the high school today. Once again, that middle school wrestling practice is at the high school today. Thank you.
Okay, this one's a lot. Hezbollah is a Shiite Muslim terrorist group, so they're conservative. They want the religious leaders to tell people how to behave. Not everybody has their own individual relationship with Allah. They want the Jews out of Lebanon. They want the strict Muslims to be in charge, and they're friends with Iran. And Iran gives them money and supplies and weapons and people because Iran is also mostly Shiite and wants to have religious leaders in control. So the Ayatollah has supported this terrorist group to just wreak havoc over here in Lebanon. And now Hezbollah has kind of crossed these boundaries here because now they're kind of wanting all the Jews back and they want the strict Muslims and not the Sunni Muslims in charge. And they don't want the Christians in there making decisions either. So now it's really, really messy. And their version of jihad is most not conservative Muslims think that jihad is a holy war with yourself to do good things. Kind of like Christians have the devil that's trying to make them do bad choices. For the terrorist groups, jihad means war against everybody who is not Muslim, their version of Muslim. So they have a huge target of people that they need to fight off. So they're trying to kill everybody who's not a strict Muslim on their team. And so that gets very messy. And the fact that they get to vote in Lebanon's government, they are actually elected leaders. They're electing terrorist leaders to their government and they all get to make decisions. So Lebanon has been fractured by a civil war and terrorism. So this next video that I'm going to show you, it's a lot of people, a lot of different names, just kind of keep track that they keep changing positions. Anybody who's in a leadership role is afraid they might be assassinated at some point by other factions that don't like them. And a lot of people tend to die by bomb.
This man has been in the news all month for surprising everyone with his resignation from Riyadh as Prime Minister of Lebanon. But once safely again on his home soil, Saad Hariri changed his mind. Appreciating the humor in this entire episode is challenging unless one understands how and why Lebanese politics ticks or doesn't. Let's go back to 1989. Not quite the end of the Lebanese Civil War, but definitely the beginning of the end of it. In 1989, Lebanese leaders gathered in Saudi Arabia to sign the Taif Agreement, which set the foundations for Lebanese politics as we know it today. At the heart of the agreement was Lebanon's principle of coexistence, which aimed to ensure power was spread equally across all religious sects. This is important because it's what the Civil War was all about in the first place. One of the leading architects of the Taif Agreement was Rafiq Hariri, who later became Prime Minister. Now let's go forward a bit. February 2005, Rafiq Hariri is assassinated in a car bomb attack in downtown Beirut. It divided Lebanon into two camps. Those who believe Syria and Hezbollah were behind Hariri's death, or the March 14th Alliance, and those who didn't, the March 8th Alliance, birthing Lebanon's two main political blocs. The March 8th Alliance is made up of Hezbollah and is supported by Iran, led by President Michel Aoun. The March 14 Alliance consists of the Future Movement and is supported by Saudi, led by Prime Minister Saad Hariri. Both camps follow the lead of their foreign backers, which so far hasn't led to an all-out proxy war in Lebanon. What it has done is make Lebanon a victim of political paralysis, where the government rarely agrees on new policies. Like during the garbage crisis in 2016, when politicians bickered over the country's waste disposal policy, leaving heaps of uncollected garbage across Beirut. So let's go to 2016. After 2 years of political deadlock, Lebanon's parliament finally agreed on the appointment of Michel Aoun as president, who was only appointed after Hariri and his camp gave their blessing. Lebanese politicians then went on to promise that the two blocs were ready to effectively work together. They even managed to approve a state budget for the first time in 12 years. Fast forward to November 4th, 2017. Saad Hariri announces his resignation out of Riyadh and does little to quash speculation that he was being forced to do so. He cites fears of assassination and meddling from Iran. Michel Aoun and his government reject Hariri's resignation and call for him to come back home. Hariri then arrives in Beirut, suspends his resignation, and tones down his anti-Iran rhetoric. Now it's unclear what Hariri will do next, and whether he will follow through with his resignation or not. So Lebanon currently stands at a precipice. Hariri's next move could either reignite the bitter rivalry between the two blocs, or ease them if he decides to resume his post. For now, Lebanese politics finds itself back in a state of disarray, and the hope sparked in 2016 by the cooperation between Michel Aoun and Saad Hariri now seems like a distant memory. So what's next for Lebanon?
So we're not sure how it's going to play out, but the fact that you have terrorist groups that are voting in your government, and every person is afraid they're going to get assassinated, makes it really hard to get along. So this is Hezbollah. This is the original guy who took the U.S. hostages and didn't like the U.S. He died at some point. And the next bearded guy is now the leader, Nasrallah. They are the Muslim groups. They're strict control. They want to fight everybody who's not on their team, and they want the Muslims to control Israel, and they want the Jews out. And so now, the fact that they're friends with Iran, and we're going to go over Syria on Wednesday, and they get seats in the Lebanon government, means they have a lot of say. And Iran has a whole bunch of money from oil, so they are well funded to have weapons and stuff.
Hezbollah recently launched an attack on the Israeli-Lebanese border. 5 anti-tank missiles were launched against a pair of Israeli military vehicles, killing 3 people and injuring many others. The exchange of fire is just the latest in an ongoing conflict between the two groups. So who exactly are the Hezbollah, and what do they want with Israel? Well, Hezbollah, also known as the Party of God, is a militant jihadist group comprised of Shia Muslims. The resistance group has risen to become a dominant military and political power in Lebanon. Hezbollah not only controls many of the country's media network, but holds a reported 12 seats in Lebanon's parliament, and possesses a military strength that is arguably stronger than the Lebanese army. They are so dominant within Lebanon that Hezbollah is often referred to as a state within a state. But Hezbollah's goals go beyond the borders of Lebanon. The group has had its sight firmly set on Israel. Hezbollah was founded in 1982 after a war with Israel that resulted in a long occupation of Lebanon. The group was established with the goal of ending the occupation in Lebanon and ultimately liberating Jerusalem and dismantling the Israeli state, which is why countries like the UK and the US categorize the group as a terrorist organization who poses a significant threat to the stability of the Middle East. So how strong is Hezbollah, and what threat do they pose to Israel? Following the end of the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon in 2000, Hezbollah's military strength grew significantly. In terms of manpower, Hezbollah currently have an estimated 60,000 fighters, but thanks to generous funding and training from Iran, this number could be set to double. According to various reports, the group are also heavily armed with some 70,000 rockets, which includes long-range missiles, anti-aircraft, and even anti-warship defense. All this amounts to a lot of firepower pointed at Israel. Reports suggest that Hezbollah's recent cross-border attack is one of the most serious clashes between the two forces since their month-long war in Lebanon back in 2006. The group's leader recently announced, "We don't fear war, and we don't hesitate in facing it if it is imposed on us." This isn't the only fight that Hezbollah is currently involved in. A large number of their troops are deployed in Syria, where Hezbollah is fighting to save President Bashar al-Assad's regime, who has helped fund the Lebanese fighters in the past. But experts suggest that the increasing costs of the war in Syria are taking its toll on Hezbollah's power, leaving Lebanon's people vulnerable to counter-strikes from anti-Assad rebels, and after this recent clash, to Israeli military attacks. So it's understandable that Hezbollah doesn't want any more conflict, at least for now. Let us know in the comments what you think of Hezbollah, and for more information on Sharia law, check out our video on what the term really means. Also, don't forget to click subscribe.
Okay, so let's review real quick, because I know it got messy. So after World War II, the Ottomans are gone. You have a British and French guy. They draw this messy map. The people are mad. Israel gets a country. Everybody's mad at the Jews. And then you have a terrorist group because they don't want the Jews there. They don't want the U.S. involved. And now they're spilling over all these lines. So you're going to do a quiz. Get to use your notes. I will take your best score because I know it gets messy today, and then we're going to do this again on Wednesday where we have another layer of mess and a couple more terrorist groups.